Well, hi there, everybody. It's Jim Parsons, your writing mentor from Australia. And this is lesson 17 of Write That Novel Now. Today, I'm going to depart from my normal lesson plan to answer some questions that viewers have sent me by email. I've written them out. I'll only deal with a couple today. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please send it to me. Because I record these videos many weeks in advance, your questions will not be read out or answered probably within 6 weeks of when you send them to me, but I certainly will reply to you immediately by email. So the first question today comes from Leslie from Boston in the US. Now, I don't know whether Leslie is male or female, but Leslie asks, I have a great plot for a fantasy novel. Should I make it a trilogy? Okay, thank you for the question, Leslie. I am not often asked, should I make a novel a trilogy? I am far more often told. So a client will get onto me and say, oh, I've got this fantastic, brilliant, big idea, and I'm going to make it a trilogy. Here's what I've got, and I will get all the details. Plot of thousands and so many things happening. And basically when I plot it, it looks something like this, where you have the goal and of course all the twists and turns until you get to the climax and the success of the plot. So this is what they've explained to me. The very next question that the person asks me is, how should I cut it up into 3? And I'm always mystified about this. One long plot, we're going to chop it into 3. It doesn't work that way. I say to the writer, don't write a trilogy, don't plan a trilogy, plan a book. You owe your reader a book, not a trilogy. Make it a self-contained item so that the goal that's set at the start is reached. End of book 1. If there's any other books, that doesn't matter. End of book 1, the goal that was set at the start is reached. It's a compact, complete unit. Then you go on to book 2, even though it's the same characters and perhaps the same journey, but the character goes on then with a new goal, which again is met. The character proceeds with a new goal next book, which again is met, because you need to give your reader this sense of satisfaction. Here's another way I'd like to explain. This, dear friends, is an aeroplane. You can see it's a Qantas plane. There's the flying kangaroo. And Qantas CEO, if you're listening, 100,000 frequent flyer points would be very, very handy for this advertisement. Here's our plane, okay? We're about to go on board and the flight attendant says, now, where would you like to sit, sir? Would you like to sit in first class? Or would you prefer a seat up the back of the plane? Or maybe over the wing? How about over the wing? And I say to the flight attendant, look, really, I had expected a whole plane. Oh, sir, the plane was too long. We had to cut it up. So which section do you want to fly in? The truth of the matter is, when it's in 3 bits, doesn't matter where you sit, the bloody plane won't fly. And that is also true of your story. If you conceive this vast 3-book trilogy, which takes one plot and chops it up into little bits, it won't fly. You are doing your readers a grave injustice. They've signed on with you to read a book. They expect satisfaction at the end of that book. They don't expect a cliffhanger and the clear implication, you better buy my next book or you're not going to finish the story. What you need to be offered, if your story is miles too long, this is what you need to be able to offer. 3 complete planes makes, even if they're smaller, makes far more sense than 1 plane chopped up that won't get off the ground, right? And you'll notice Qantas, Virgin and Emirates. I love Emirates. Emirates is a great airline, but that's the way to do it. Give your reader 3 complete novels. There's good reasons for this. People say, I'm writing a trilogy. The presumption is the reader is going to start with the first one, automatically go to the second, and then to the third. In truth, if the third one is not published for 4 or 5 years, it may be the very first book that your reader ever gets to read. And if they can't make much sense of it, or you've got to spend 2 or 3 chapters trying to redraft in summary what took place in books 1 and 2, it's a mess. Don't do it. Make sure that every book is self-sufficient and stand on its own. That's the best way to handle a trilogy. So write a book, not a trilogy. Write a book, then write another one, and then write another one. You can put them all under the same general trilogy heading, but each book must be self-sufficient. Give your reader their due. This is what they paid for. And very often when I tell my clients this, hey, but isn't it a good idea to leave the story up in the air? That's a real hook. Then the reader wants to come back and read more. I don't think that's a hook. I think it's an insult. If you haven't been able to construct a story and characters that are wonderful enough to make your readers rub their hands together in anticipation of your next book, you're not a writer. If you have to leave a story half finished in the hope your reader will come back next time to read the rest of it, you're a lousy writer. You don't need to do that. Write 3 great books so that any one of them can be picked up and enjoyed without reference to the others. I hope that makes sense. The second question comes from Jennifer from Tunbridge Wells in the UK. Hey, I've actually been to Tunbridge Wells, Jennifer. Who knows? It was some years ago. I might have passed you in the street. Never know. Okay, Jennifer asks, my story takes a long time to develop. I have seen some stories that start with the big scene from the end and then show how it led up to that. Should I make my opening scene the one where my character is fighting for her life? I'm probably going to disappoint you here, Jennifer. Without seeing your story, my answer is a flat no. Yes, I've read stories like that too. The opening scene is taken from way back in the book somewhere. You know what I always think when I encounter that? I think, this writer hasn't got an interesting thing to say for the first 200 pages. This is going to be boring because they had to find an exciting scene from late in the story to get me in. I'm a suspicious cove. Reminds me of those movie trailers you see on TV. Explosions, cars rolling over, people running, flames everywhere. You go to see the movie and that's about all there was. They picked out the 5 good bits to put in the trailer. Don't be like that. Don't feel obliged to pick out something from the end, get your reader hooked so that they then have to wade through several hundred pages of boring stuff to get to the main point. There are other ways around it. You can jazz up the start. You can have what's called bridging conflict. Bridging conflict is an interesting one. If you know that you need time to develop the story, things happen a little bit slowly in the start, you can have bridging conflict. And that means that you show your central character as you're exploring and opening up this character for the reader and getting them interested in the person. You can engage them in some conflict, which may not be relevant to the main plot, right? So you can show your character arguing with the librarian over an overdue book fine, or you can show your character being confronted by road rage as they drive to work and having to deal with some maniac that's annoying them on the road. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as you've got some conflict with your character as central focus of that conflict, then your reader is engaged. Conflict works. That's what you need. Conflict, an anxious situation like that, even minor irritations, that will give you time to develop character, show how they respond under those situations, and develop some love for your character in your reader. That will get you through some of the slow bits. You don't have to bring a big scene to the start and then go back to the boring stuff and start all over. Third and last question comes from Alan, who doesn't say where he's from. Alan says, I have a story idea and I'd love to write a novel, but I don't think I'd be good at it because I left school a bit early and don't have much of an idea about punctuation or a very big vocabulary. Okay, Alan, a lot of people are in your position and feel really nervous about the idea. They fantasize about writing a novel and never get around to it. The strange thing is, you may be better off than many people that do have or believe they have a big vocabulary. It can be a danger. Can you tell a story if you're sitting down with someone? Can you tell a good yarn? Can you make people laugh? Can you make people interested in what you're saying? If you can, you're using your own basic language. You don't need a heck of a lot of words to communicate a good story. You don't need fancy language. You don't need flowery language. And in fact, one of the greatest problems for novice writers, they have the sense that they need to sound like a writer, to sound writerly. And what comes out is often pretty awful. If you can write simple language, that's what you should do. Get your story, communicate your story simply. Punctuation, yeah, that's an issue. But if you're determined, you can learn punctuation. It's there on the net. I can teach you punctuation. In fact, I might make that my next course. It's doable. You can learn this stuff. And your word processor will probably give you some clues too, if you've got a good program. If you use simple language, you're going to avoid this terrible problem of trying to sound writerly, which can end up with purple prose. It's not hard to define purple prose, but sometimes finding the fine line between good prose and slipping over into purple is a little hard. Purple prose is prose that draws attention to itself, to the words on the page, and takes your reader away from the story. In other words, it's one of those big no-nos. You're breaking through your reader's suspension of disbelief. There they were engrossed in your story, and suddenly there's this passage that throws them right out and they come up gasping for air. So what's purple prose? It's when you go too far. It's when you're using unnecessary words, too many or too broad metaphors and figurative language. When you're trying to sound like a poet and add lots of alliteration and assonance. Alliterations where you've got 3 P's in a row. Assonance when you've got sounds like an A sound that's repeated, as the act of aspirates, right? So that's assonance. When this is all packed into a passage, overwhelming, and it becomes bad writing. Let me give you a couple of examples. You all know Sean Penn, the actor and producer. Sean decided to turn his hand to a novel, and it got published. Of course it got published, because the publisher would know anything by a name like Sean Penn is got an assured audience. They can't lose. But boy, I think in many cases the reader lost. This is from Sean's novel, Bob Honey, Who Just Do Stuff. This is the passage. Purple prose. There is pride to be had where the prejudicial is practiced with precision in the trenchant triage of tactile terminations. This came to him via the crucible-forged fact that all humans are themselves animal, and that rifle-ready human hunters of alternatively species prey should best beware the raging ricochet that soon will come their way. Oh, God. Okay, enough said about that one. Come across that and you sort of think, what? And it's hard to even get sense. That's trying to use big words for the sake of big words. And Alan, who wrote me the letter, you got words like that, toss them away. You don't need them. Here's another example. This one is more romantic, shall we say. Got a more romantic flow to it instead of a technical one, but it's still purple prose. This comes from a thing called Silk and Steel by Ron Miller. He spoke to her, but all she heard was music, and his scent filled her head like a wineskin. Her nerves resonated in symphony, and her body swayed with his orbits like a compass following a magnet. Her mouth and tongue were as dry as flannel. They burned like a furnace, yet her body was beaded with sweat like a glass of cold wine. Now, just one of those metaphors or similes might have been sufficient. When you have as dry as a flannel, then burned like a furnace, followed by beaded with sweat like a glass of cold wine, you've got all these wildly different images: a flannel, a furnace, a glass of cold wine, all packed in, and it's just too much. So be aware of this. Just write simple prose. You don't have to dress it up. Later on, you could go back, and as your skills progress, you might find a way where, yes, you could find a very fitting metaphor. That just watch out for alliteration. Sometimes it's quite jarring. You notice Sean Penn put in this great list of them. Pride, where prejudicial is practiced with precision, followed by the trenchant triage of tactile terminations. Oh my goodness. Watch out for that. You can even do it accidentally. I sometimes point this out to my writing client. Tucked in here without you even realising it is a list of T's or a list of R's, and it just draws attention to the words. Don't let your writing draw attention to itself. Let the story emerge from behind your words. Okay, that's enough for today. 3 letters or 3 emails that I've worked on. If you've got some, as I said, my email address will follow. Please send me some more questions and I'll try to deal with them. So that's all for lesson 17. Until next week, thank you for watching. Goodbye and keep safe.